Welcome back to Marvel Maniac and MCU After Show. This is your host, Eric Cicada, aka Mr. Honest, back with you for a big episode. Welcome to Phase 5. We have officially entered Phase 5 of the MCU with this installment, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. This is the third Ant-Man movie. However, this is Ant-Man's 5th appearance in the MCU, as well as the Wasp, who's made her appearance in Avengers Endgame, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and the first Ant-Man, so this is her 4th appearance. I remember a while back thinking that this movie was going to be a later release in the year, and we get Guardians first. However, we're here in the Ant-Man universe again, getting to experience kind of a big step forward in the MCU and where it's going. Phase 5 launches with a huge title. My biggest and only criticism of the movie right now is that there was too much given away for a Marvel trailer in this movie. I'm gonna say at this point, from this point on, spoilers for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and the greater MCU as a whole. We're going to be talking a little bit about the show Loki, so if you haven't seen Loki, just be ready for some major plot point reveals from that show. So this movie is all about breaking into a new beyond. Quantumania gives us a new look into the quantum realm. And the very beginning of this movie, the first shot is Janet Van Dyne at the bottom of the quantum realm, searching for something, if anything, and then she finds it, and Kang the Conqueror. And that is kind of where this movie jumps off of. We cut back to kind of present day, and it is just believed by everyone who saved Janet, Hank, Scott, Hope, Cassie, that there's nothing really down there. It's just kind of like this vast nothingness. It's another universe, but like there's really no signs of life or anything. Like there's not sentient beings. There's nothing, nothing that we kind of come to learn in this movie exists to anyone but Janet. And that is because fear is instilled in Janet from the time she was down there. Last week, when I talked about Ant-Man and the Wasp's journey through the MCU, I mentioned how Scott Lang had a podcast, and I thought that was mistaken for a book, which I said in the previous episode. However, he does have a podcast in the show Miss Marvel, and in this movie, he is releasing a book, and he is telling all his stories about his time with the Avengers, how the Hulk turned him into a baby, and he's kind of going around from place to place, business to business, like just man of the town. And another thing I will point out, a big thing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is movies. The third installment for a hero in a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie must have a voiceover narration that accompanies the beginning and the end of the movie. For some reason, like nearly everyone, except for Captain America 3, Iron Man 3, Thor 3, now this one, there's a narration talking like, I'm Scott Lang, this is me, this is about me being Ant-Man, and I find that kind of a nice see-through, like a nice continuity between the Marvel movies. Just I don't know why they make that decision, if it's a conscious decision. A lot of the continuity decisions seem like conscious by Marvel, and I don't know if it's just like in the contract that the main character needs to have a voiceover narration to start their third movie, and it reminds me so much of Iron Man 3 because of that. A movie that we will get into very soon, if not like next episode, because it's kind of where I am in my going back and reviewing all of the greater MCU right now. But let's get back to this movie, comparing it to Iron Man 3, and that this is about a hero, where he is, and where he is because of what he's done as a hero. And Scott Lang doesn't have a whole lot of trauma at the start of this movie. Scott Lang is kind of at peace. Like I mentioned in my last episode, Scott has lost a lot of time with his daughter, Cassie. And I did think that maybe he was going to work out some sort of bargain with Kang in this movie for a time. And that's kind of what the trailers did lead us to believe, a little misguiding in the trailers there, which is good on Marvel's part. However, Scott's lack of time with his daughter, Cassie, kind of drives him in this movie. I think the idea of losing her, which is presented multiple times, is devastating to him considering how much he's lost. So this movie centers around the conflict of the group being trapped in the quantum realm and just trying to get out back to their base reality. by not telling her family what was down there, it kind of sends them into a whirlwind when they do get down there, and they're all in a state of shock because they had no idea that there was life, let alone kind of a war going on down in the quantum realm. And the thing is, going into this movie, that's all kind of known and put together by you as an audience member. And that's one thing, and I'm going to probably talk about it maybe once or twice more, just because it's my genuine thought about it. The trailers of this movie gave away way too much. A few things in that we get to see MODOK in the trailer, which is a huge reveal in this movie. And we'll get to that. We'll get to all the cool reveals once I get past this kind of like little bit of a rant on the spoiler aspects of trailers. My favorite thing about the MCU in previous installments of movies and anything they put out, it was mostly movies up until recently, is that the trailer barely gave anything away for the movie. Like Avengers Endgame, we didn't even know there was going to be time travel. You could kind of guess that there might be time travel, but no, it relied on the characters in the promotion. And what this movie did so wrong was give away too much of Kang and give away too much of major plot reveals that are supposed to be like a big surprise. Like big set pieces in the movie shouldn't have been given away. Like they shouldn't even have shown all the Ant-Men running in the trailer. If they shouldn't have shown MODOK in the trailer, and they shouldn't have shown so much Kang action in the trailer, because that leaves us with seeing pretty much bits and pieces of the entire movie. And that doesn't make the movie bad. It just kind of hinders your experience in watching it. It reminds me of when I kind of wish, and they never do this, but I kind of wish they'd never put Hulk in the advertisements for Thor Ragnarok, and how that would have been a really cool cameo. Just Marvel needed this movie to be a success, so they had to show more in the trailers. Now, trying to put that all aside and going in with fresh eyes, I think the plot points and the reveals in this movie are really cool. And I think there's a lot of fan service in this movie. I haven't even gotten to the post-credit scene yet, which is maybe just a main reason to go see the movie if you're just a fan of Loki or a fan of Marvel Comics. We'll talk about the post-credit scene in a bit. I just want to get through the movie because there's a lot that happened in this movie. We did learn a lot. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is when Scott and Cassie enter the quantum realm, that thing they have to drink literally out of that goo guy, the red goo guy. Drink the goo. And they drink it, and it gives everyone kind of this universal language, and everyone can speak to each other after they drink this alien goo, which is later seen taken in shot form at a bar when Janet, Hope, and Hank are meeting Bill Murray for the first time. The only time. Let's backtrack a tiny little bit to how they got down there. Cassie was with Hank, her grandpa, building basically GPS Hubble telescope type deal that goes into the quantum realm and just surveys everything. And it sends out a beacon into the quantum realm. And this is all being presented to Janet, Hope, and Scott. And, Janet's all on board up until they say beacon. And at that point, she says, shut it down, to a point where she knocks the thing and sets them on a course of going in there. I don't know. See, I don't know if when she hits it, it happens because she hit it. The fact that they get sucked into the quantum realm, or like Kang was surveying them and planned for that to happen at that exact moment. Like he grabbed them in some way with his powers from the beacon, and just because they were about to shut it down, he grabbed them. One or the other could have happened. It's not too clear on which did. Once Scott and Cassie drink the goo, we meet a new character named Kaz who can read minds, and he basically clears the air in that they're all good. They know nothing at all, Scott and Cassie. The movie takes a long time after we meet Kang in the beginning. It takes probably a good 30, maybe even 40 minutes before we see him again. They're kind of like building him up in that this group that Scott and Cassie find are kind of rebels against Kang, and they're in hiding because Kang burned everything. The Conqueror, they call him. There's this one character with a glass hammer head, and he shoots light out of his head, and I thought that was really cool. I thought the character designs in this were really fun, and the new character Gentora, kind of this leader of this rebel group that Scott and Cassie find. She's kind of a big player in this movie, on the ground, helping fight Kang at the end of the movie. She's kind of gothic looking, a gothic warrior, and Kaz is Quaz or Kaz, I don't know. On IMDb, it's Quaz. He's the mind reader, and I thought like the scenes between him and Scott were really funny. We somehow got more and less of Bill Murray in this movie than I was expecting at the same time, because it was like one big scene that Bill Murray's character, Lord Kryler, came in, and he is Janet's hope to find Scott and Cassie. We learned that Janet and Lord Kryler, played by Bill Murray, had somewhat of like a romantic history, and Kryler definitely reminds Janet of that throughout their conversation. And the conversation at this alien bar, the scenes in this movie are taking place in such alien places. It's almost like it's in deep outer space. The quantum realm. It's almost like another distant planet. And the music and the soundtrack kind of really captures like the weirdness of the place. And just like Bill Murray says, like he doesn't even know what humans are, even though he is a human. It's just a whole other world with a whole other language and meaning and creatures. And the movie, like almost every scene in the movie has something like fantastic or wild or just out of this world. And the movie does a great job of like bringing us into a whole other dimension that we've never really seen in the Ant-Man movies, let alone the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We got some hints of the quantum realm in the other movies, and they did a good job of kind of expanding that art style on a ground level. Like, where is the bottom of this place? And if there is life down here, how can it sustain? Well, it's not doing so great overall because of the wars happening. The life like was probably flourishing a little bit better down there when Kang the Conqueror wasn't like dominating. So Lord Kryler lets Janet and Co know that Kang is already coming for Scott and Cassie. He already knows they're here, and if he knows they're here, he knows you're here. Something along the lines of that, and he's gonna bring them in. Like he has like a little gang, and he's gonna turn on Janet and Hope and Hank, and they don't take that, so they fight their way out of this situation, and they steal his ship, which Hank commands like goo arm steering. There's like goo, and you put your arms in it, and you steer the ship. And it's very alien and very odd, and Hank learns how to fly this thing like a master. At the beginning of the movie, we meet these special ants that Hank is working on, like these radioactive ants, and we see them getting sucked into the quantum realm when everyone else does. So they steal the ship, and meanwhile, Scott and Cassie are taken by MODOK. I forget which one they go with in the movie, but it's mental, mobile, mechanized, organ, one of those three M's. So mobile organism designed only for killing. And MODOK in this movie is Darren Cross from the first Ant-Man. And the trailer giving that away is so upsetting. They didn't have to show his face. I think that spoiler got out, and man, this could have been a really cool twist without knowing that. However, his presence in the movie is so funny and so strong. I think they did a good job with MODOK. However, I don't know if this is one of those things I'm going to be way off on. Like, comic book fans are going to be really pissed or something that they like changed a big character in MODOK. However, that's one of my favorite things about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is when they change the small things to accompany the universe that they're creating, and creating original, unique stories. My only maybe gripe is that maybe he shouldn't have died. Like why can't Marvel? Why does Marvel have to take away like a really cool villain right away? However, we're in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, so we can get that MODOK back or a different MODOK. This is like the time in Marvel where they can like start and reset stories in the snap of a finger. Through Bill Murray's character, we learn that Janet has a dark past with Kang, and we don't really know what it is. It's just that she's not what everyone thinks she is what he's saying. Janet finally tells the story of what happened when she met Kang, and it was really cool. Like, everything about Kang in this movie, just like the story of Kang and like where he came from and everything going on about him is like kind of where my attention was at in this movie, and it was the most interesting by far. He has this multiversal ship that he crash landed on, and she found that was going to be the only way for her to get out of the quantum realm. So him and her teamed up, Kang and Janet Van Dyne to rebuild his multiversal time seat. And this probably is going to have a more official name in the future, but it's a multi-dimensional time chair, and it can go through time and it can go through multiverses. And she helps him rebuild it over like a long period of time. She says they tried everything to the point where they finally fixed it. And when they fixed it, this energy running through it when he was sitting on it reveals all of his thoughts and like memories to Janet. And in an instant, she sees just devastation. Like she sees war, she sees suffering, she hears people screaming, and she knows how evil Kang is and what he's done. Going back to when he meets Scott now, he says, "Are you an Avenger? Haven't I killed you before?" They all blend together after a period of time. So this Kang the Conqueror, if you want to actually think about it, has gone through our MCU timeline. Just imagine all the movies that have happened previous to this one, and he has taken our Avengers out of, like, Thor 1 could have been a victim of Kang, just as Thor 1 is saving the day in that small town. I think it's Albuquerque. I think it's New Mexico, not Albuquerque. When Thor is fighting in New Mexico, Kang comes down, takes him out. When Iron Man is fighting the drones in Iron Man 2, he comes down, he takes them out. You know, when the Guardians of the Galaxy are fighting for the Power Stone on Xandar, Kang comes down, takes out all the Guardians. Kang defeats Avengers, and he's done this multiple times because the multiversal war is officially afoot. We'll talk more about that towards the end of the episode when I talk about the post-credit scene, but all we know is Kang has taken out multiple Avengers at this point, and what Janet did when she found out what Kang did in his life, she destroys everything so he can't get out of the quantum realm, stranding her there as well. And she finds out that Kang was actually exiled. Exiled by who? Well, later we will find that out. And one of my favorite post-credit scenes of all time, that, like, matching up with maybe the first Avengers post-credit scene where we meet Thanos. I don't know the name for these things, but the things that make everything, like these discs that Ant-Man throws that makes things larger and smaller, Janet throws just a bunch of those on Kang's multiversal core, and it just blows it up into a giant situation, and that's where she leaves it. And this is where Ant-Man comes in for Kang, and he needs Ant-Man to go retrieve the core and to shrink it back down, or he'll hurt Cassie. He'll really hurt Cassie. Like Kang has kind of like force powers, like in Star Wars. I don't know if he went to the Star Wars universe and learned the force in all his conquering. This Kang can, like, force choke people, and that's what he was doing to Cassie when he threatened Scott to go retrieve the multiversal core. Cassie in this movie has her own Ant-Man suit, and I haven't mentioned how cool I think it is, and she really pops in and out of action really fluently. The more strong women in the MCU, the better. So Scott goes on the mission to retrieve the multiversal core, while Hank, Hope, and Janet are on their way to go help him. They end up getting there in just the nick of time. Another thing kind of shown in the trailers. When Scott is down to retrieve the core, he starts splitting up into different versions of himself. It's kind of like a multiversal paradox, and he's on comms with MODOK, who refuses to be answered Darren anymore at this point. He's just MODOK, and that's kind of his identity. He has a whole identity crisis throughout this film, MODOK. He doesn't even know why he should exist, so he becomes just kind of a dick. And that's what Cassie tells him, to stop being a dick. So he doesn't want to be like that anymore by the end of the movie. So he makes kind of like a sacrifice play. But I like the part when Scott is transforming into multiple versions of himself. And every time a Scott Lang tries to turn into Giant Man, the Giant Man kind of dissipates. It's like, I got this. All the Scott Langs are like, I got this. And then we get like a Dairy Queen, not Dairy Queen, Baskin Robbins Scott Lang. And he is kind of the most encouraging of the bunch. So they all pile up like a big group of ants. Scott is pretty much there, and he throws his disc at the core, and it doesn't shrink. And then Hope comes in at the exact right minute, and they both throw more disc at the core, and it finally shrinks into Scott's hand. And Scott temporarily saves the day, retrieving something for someone that doesn't need to be in that person's hands. So Janet quickly arrives to tell Scott that he can't hand it over, and then Kang shows up, and he pretty much says Janet has a big way of lying, and Kang is very betrayed by Janet in this movie. Like, if this Kang were evil, this version of Kang was really kind of shown good by Janet, and I think when she saw his thoughts, he became really vulnerable and defensive, and this Kang is very, very defensive and vulnerable already because he's been exiled by his own, we later learn, literally his own counterparts. He's been exiled. So this is probably a very bad version, or maybe, scary enough to think that this Kang might be like one of the weaker Kangs of the bunch, and they exiled him for like being like maybe a good version. Like, what if this were the best like good guy version of Kang that we just lost, kind of like Scott is saying at the end of the movie. At this point, there's a small fight between Kang, Ant-Man, and the Wasp, and he kind of flicks them literally away from him, and they get some punches in too. There's a lot of fighting between those three in this movie, and there's some good action in this movie. It seems like this Kang was really holding off his full power like until the end of the movie when everything was really threatened in his face. So Kang takes the core, takes it back to like the center of his city, and Cassie in the meanwhile escapes and goes back to the group of rebels featuring Gentora and Quaz, their names, and she eventually sets out like a beacon that overrides Kang's beacon, that Kang is telling the whole quantum realm that he's gonna take his conquering to the next level into the outer world, and he's bringing his whole civilization that he's built with them. Cassie is able to override this message and say now is the time to stand up and rebel against Kang. And this is where Scott realizes he needs to go back and help his daughter, and the whole gang heads back towards the city, and Hank reveals to Scott that he read his book, and he directly quotes a line from the book, and I can't think of the exact line now, but it's something about we can always get bigger or something like that, hinting towards we need Giant Man right now. So as Kang is powering up his multiversal like city to travel from like this quantum realm into our world pretty much and take over our world, let alone the multiverse, he is stopped by Giant Man, Scott Lang, trampling through the city. Probably the best cinematic scenes we get in the movie are like Scott tackling this city, being technically a war machine against all of Kang's army. And man, I just like the visuals of this a lot. There's so much color, and there was so much detail. And I don't think we've ever seen Scott get that big. He gets bigger in every movie. And as this is happening, Cassie is working her way on the ground with the rebels, and they eventually make their way to Kang. And Scott does this giant like jump into Kang's force field, and he breaks down the force field and breaks everything. Well, just enough. Like, it's not fully broken to where they can't use it to transport back later, but Kang believes it's broken. So this is where Kang kind of takes his steps out. Meanwhile, Cassie is just being chased by MODOK, and she punches him in the face as she becomes giant for the first time, and she knocks him out really good, and she tells him to stop being a dick, and I love that. And Cassie and Scott embrace each other when they're both giant, and they're both like mentioning how they both get super hungry when they're giant. This is when Kang goes on a rampage and starts using all his powers against the rebellion. I feel like Kang's suit has a lot of Iron Man powers with the repulsor blast that he used, along with those force powers that he has, where he can kind of like throw people and pick people up with kind of this sort of magic. Kang is very powerful. However, not anything against Hank Pym's radioactive ants. I don't know if they're radioactive or what's the deal with them exactly, but they're super ants. And basically what happened was when they entered the quantum realm, they lived for like 1,000 years and built their civilization, like a whole civilization, and then came back and found Hank. So Hank is the classic Ant-Man, and there's true homage to that when everyone's just being overrun by Kang. The ants come in and save the day. And that's kind of a nice homage to the franchise. And if you think about it, we know Kang the Conqueror is a huge threat, but no threat greater than our heroes. Our heroes are able to take him down in this movie, almost making it seem like he's strong, but he's defeatable. And how can he be this next great threat exactly? Well, there was a reason he was exiled, and we don't know the exact reason yet, if we are to ever learn why this exact Kang was exiled. So while the giant horde of ants are attacking Kang, he's using a force field to protect himself from the ants, and MODOK comes in and makes a sacrifice play. And every time someone meets MODOK, Darren Cross, they're like, Darren? And like Hope meets him at the very end, and Scott's like, yeah, it's a long story, I'll tell you about it later. It's just shocking what happened to this man. Like these comic book things happening to like regular people and characters that we, like this character that we even knew in the first Ant-Man movie, Darren Cross. By the way, I like that line by Cassie where she says, I was attacked by a giant bumblebee in my room when I was a kid. My life has never been normal. After MODOK makes his sacrifice play, the day is apparently saved. Kang seems defeated, and everyone makes their way back up to the main chamber of Kang's like lair, because Janet can open the quantum realm door for the time being to get them back home. So everyone goes through the door, and Scott kind of like is the last one, and he pushes Cassie, I think, to get her out of the way, because Kang is actually attacking Scott again. So they have this big brutal battle. Again, we see Kang stomp Scott's helmet in the trailer, which is like one of the big final things. Like I was a little less worried for Scott for some reason because of the trailer. Like I felt like Scott was safe. I didn't think they were going to take Scott out. But then for a slight second, I was like, are they going to do this? Is Scott going to make it out of here? The Wasp pops back out of the door to help Scott, and Ant-Man and the Wasp beat the living crap out of Kang the Conqueror together, and they push him right into like the power source of the core, of the multiversal core, and he gets like sucked into it. Anytime a villain gets sucked into some sort of a vortex, I don't believe they're fully gone. Similar to Darren Cross in this very franchise, when he got sucked into the quantum realm in the first movie, his body was being like morphed, and then he got sucked in, leading in to him being MODOK. They could have planned on that all along, and the fact that Kang the Conqueror gets like kind of sucked into his machine, it just makes me think that that's not the last we're even going to see of this variant. Scott and co. finally leave the quantum realm, and we end the movie with another montage of Scott out in his regular life, kind of montage narrating what's happening, and he goes on to say that he defeated Kang. Everything's good, right? Is everything actually good? He did say that something worse is coming, and he just has this looming threat, and it's so much like Iron Man in Iron Man 3. Although we sort of leave Scott on the note that Tony starts on in that movie. Overall, this movie is about family and wanting to keep your family safe. However, there is a bit of a moral of the story in that, like, don't mess with a universe that you don't know too much about. If Cassie never put out that GPS, they never would have gotten brought down there. And this Kang dying, leading to the post-credit scene that we get, where we're going to talk about that in a few seconds, that might, like, the events of this movie might lead to catastrophic events in the MCU, just opening that door, because if this Kang wasn't defeated, it wouldn't have let the other Kangs know that the Avengers are ready for a greater form of war, kind of like Thor says in the first Avengers movie. Earth is like telling, by using the Tesseract, it's telling the rest of the universe that it's ready for like a greater form of war. By entering the multiverse, the Council of Kangs is informed that they might be ready for another form of war. So the post-credit scene, we get more Kangs, and we get a lot more Kangs. It is the Council of Kangs. And it starts off, we see a big statue, and this place looks a lot more dark than the TVA looks in Loki. And they're all entering through similar time doors to what we see in Loki. And there's a few at the top talking about how the exiled one was defeated, and one of them says to the other, "Don't you wish it was you that got him?" And it wasn't any of us that got him; it was one of them. And they look at the multiverse, and kind of the main Pharaoh like Kang. He has a real raspy voice like this. He's saying how they've touched the multiverse; they're becoming a greater threat. And this is why they're assembling, because of this Kang's death. So one Kang says, "How many did you call?" And the main Kang says, "I called all of them." So we see the stadium basically filling up with all of these variants of Kang cheering and like going crazy. There are so many more Kangs than you can even imagine. It is insane. In our second post-credit scene, we get another Kang and a look at, I think it's going to be Loki season 2. It doesn't say it directly. And he says, "Time is everything," while revealing to a stage of people in like 1950s attire, it looks like 1960s. It's very early times. He says time shapes our lives, but perhaps we can shape it. And we get a close-up on this Kang, who is like a mad scientist version of Kang the Conqueror. And then we cut to Loki in the crowd, and he says that's him. And Mobius is like, "Oh, come on, he's not that bad." And Loki's like, "He is." Damn. I'm so excited for Loki season 2. It's going to be really good after this movie. And this post-credit scene really does set up the next Avengers movie. The first one, at least, and the second one, just showing all the variants of Kang, the possibilities of Kang. The first one, the fact that they're saying the Avengers pretty much are a threat to them now, the fact that they're touching the multiverse. It might also be a reflection of like what Doctor Strange is doing down there, and some of the things in No Way Home that are like kind of letting the Council of Kangs know that the Avengers are starting to take down Kangs. And if one Kang can be defeated, all of them can most likely be defeated. But if they're together, then they're a huge threat. That's a hive mind of genius. So it is the greatest threat the Avengers have faced yet. The first Kang we met in this movie, he reminds you of Thanos in one line where he's like, "I am right. I know I'm right." Thanos is like, "I'm the only one who knows it." You can compare these villains and their intellect at the very least, and the fact that this Kang is on even like a mental level of Thanos, whether he doesn't have like the brute strength, goes to show that if you get like 1,000 plus of these guys together, they're going to be a huge threat to our Avengers. It looks like the events of Loki happened before or after the show, depending on how you look at it. I believe what happened at the end of Loki allowed for the Council of Kangs to even exist. At the beginning of Loki, there was one timeline, and at the end of Loki, the multiverse was expanding infinitely. Screen Crush on YouTube has a theory that He Who Remains and this version of Kang the Conqueror that we get in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania are the same guy, and that this Kang actually ends up escaping and infiltrating the Council of Kangs and conquering them, leading to him being He Who Remains, the final Kang variant. And we learn how kind of in Loki that he uses this giant smoke beast, Goliath, to defeat all of his variants and create one sacred timeline. Is that going to happen again? Probably not, because this is a separate instance of that multiversal war. Like the multiversal war happened in Loki, then He Who Remains won, and now since He Who Remains was defeated in Loki, this current timeline is going to have another multiversal war, unknowing to pretty much everyone that this has already happened. So is there a possibility that He Who Remains will return? Yes, the possibilities are absolutely endless. it just probably won't be the same outcome. Or will it? Or do we not even know the full scope of Loki, in that Loki sees the TVA and what this Kang is calling the sacred timeline and he who remains? What if he's just one sort of like Nazi Kang variant that's letting everyone believe that this is the sacred timeline and there's only one, and he's just part of the Council of Kangs secretly or something like that? Or he's just lying about his variants and he didn't win. He's just in the sacred timeline. Maybe Earth 616 was just being protected in maybe a pocket timeline dimension, something like that. Anything can happen, and I'm so curious to see where the MCU decides to go with this Council of Kangs. Now it's just this looming threat that we're going to be thinking about for a long time, and that looming threat will always be rooted back to this movie. And that's why I think this movie is going to age really well. I think we're going to get a lot more Kang. I think Kang is going to be go down in history as one of the greatest on-screen villains when we get his whole story through Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. If that's the story they're going with, who knows? Maybe the Avengers will defeat the Kangs in Kang Dynasty. Maybe they'll defeat him and all his variants, and then as a result of that fight, we'll have a whole other story in Secret Wars 1 and 2. I think they're doing 2. It's not confirmed yet, but there's rumors that there's 2 Secret Wars movies. Now we're going to head over to reddit.com/r/Marvel Studios to see what the fans are saying. What does everyone think about this movie? Little Biped said, I really liked how it related to Paul Rudd's inner monologue turned anxiety attack at the end of the movie, which I think is totally played for humor, but it was so incredibly accurate. Anxiety is a thing, and when you have a looming threat like Kang in the multiverse, you're going to probably get some anxiety because of what you went through fighting him. A reply to that is from Manholm. Exactly. Scott is a happy-go-lucky guy in every film. That scene fits perfectly with his baseline attitude coming into contact with some true existential dread. Very accurate. X3GXU says, whole movie is just an exposition dump on Kang. She replies, literally, the text in the end doesn't even say that Ant-Man will return. It says that Kang will return. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot about that. Yeah, we are not talking about Ant-Man anymore by the end of this movie and this podcast. It is really all about Kang. Elemental Rabbit says, among many other criticisms, Kang's guards really need to learn to properly restrain prisoners during transport and ideally confiscate all their magic discs. True Legit Damar replied, that scene where Cassie escapes the guards was funny, how the next patrol just ignored the elephant in the room. I agree, Kang's guards were somewhat like stormtroopers in that they're not the brightest and they're kind of just like henchies. The door doesn't work said, sees 5 seconds of Loki. Okay, fine. I feel like it's now worth the ticket price. Poo Poo Buttholes says, I like when Kang's soldiers found Gentoro's resistant group. She was, I'm sorry, that guy's name. I like how when Kang's soldiers found Gentoro's resistance group, she was like, you led them right here when they were the ones who kidnapped Scott and Cassie and brought them right into their base, LMAO. Yeah, it's true. They were a little blamey there when it was their fault. Big WB1024 replied, you actually remembered their names? I want to forget all the new characters. I felt like I met 20 new Meeks. Some honest comments here. I didn't dislike the new characters. I don't see them coming back for future installments unless it's like an Ant-Man movie. I mean, we didn't even get Lewis in this movie. Aunt Hottie said, I cannot believe the trailers hinted at a stronger emotional arc for Scott and Cassie than the film delivered. What happened to Scott wanting more time after all that he lost during the blip? None of that. I also thought it was hilarious that you thought Hope was sacrificing herself at the end and her and Scott would be stuck in the quantum realm, but then Cassie reopens the portal. It did seem like they were going to be stuck in there, but we already know that Cassie has the technology and it would take some great efforts on the outside for them not to be able to come back. And that is another thing about the trailers that maybe were kind of misleading. Like, it's cool when a Marvel trailer misleads you about, like, the Hulk being in Infinity War because that character arc is actually being built in a way they don't want to reveal in the trailers. It's another thing to, like, hint at kind of a strong storyline that probably should be explored a little bit further in that Scott lost all this time. We're dealing with a time-traveling villain, and it really is going to push these two stories together in that sense, where the person who Kang is talking to about time in the movie is Janet, and Janet has also lost a lot of time. The mid-credit scene is literally one of the most unintentionally funniest scenes throughout this movie. Like, I can't take the Council of Kangs seriously with that kind of presentation, says Fakers555. Replying to that is Ooga Booga 2 saying, I laughed at it too. I thought the Stadium of Kangs was acting like a bunch of wild animals. Looks like he had a blast playing the part. It does. Jonathan Majors is having a lot of fun with Kang, especially those top Council Kangs. They're different voices and very distinct character attributes. I think he's only going to dwell further into variants and giving them their own take. That's why in like interviews he says he considered He Who Remains a different guy because he's at a different place on his journey as Kang the Conqueror in this movie. So he kind of has to look at them as like different but the same character. Carax's Mealy's on Reddit says, you're telling me that Kang, who's faced hundreds of rebellions, conquered a lot of worlds, killed a lot of Avengers, lost because of an invasion by ants? Don't know what you think, but it has to be lazy writing for me. I would disagree. I think Ant-Man is an Avenger. I think he's really honed in on his powers in this movie, and I think the fact that he could take down Kang when Kang is in a weak point. I don't think Kang has access to all of his powers in the quantum realm, and I believe that Ant-Man and the Wasp can take him down. Could there have been some more compelling writing in the movie? Maybe a little bit, but I wasn't too put off by the writing in the movie. I wanted that exploration of that time lost with Scott and his daughter. However, they didn't go that route, and Marvel does what it wants. It just does what it wants. I don't think misleading major plot points like that in a trailer and having it not be there, it can be a little off-putting. But that doesn't take away from how I felt about this movie as a whole, which was really fun, a thrill ride. Ant-Man movies are usually a little bit more comedic, and there was just a lot more at stake in this movie for our heroes. JagFan Josh 3552 says, each time they showed Darren's face, I couldn't help but crack up. Yeah, MODOK was really funny. I liked him in this movie. Zombie Dracula said, Michael Douglas saying, a great writer once said, there's always room to grow, was maybe the best part for me as an Ant-Man fan. That was dead on the type of Ant-Man to Ant-Man talk I came to see. Yeah, Michael Douglas keeping a cool head throughout the movie kept me calm as the roller coaster ride went from okay to great to bad to great to okay to all right to oh, Loki. I like that comment from Zombie Dracula. That was fun. T-Man391 says he looked like he was having a great time playing a kooky old man. All the ant talk and his smirk when they won the day at the end. I love how after being so uncomfortable with flying before he went, I'll drive, and set his arms up to be swallowed. Yeah, Hank Pym in this movie is fantastic, and he's the definitive classic Ant-Man. Paul Rudd and Scott Lang, definitive Ant-Man for me, but Hank Pym, definitive classic Ant-Man. I mean, technically in the MCU, he is the OG Ant-Man. I'm going to read one more set of comments. Zlayno says, Kang in the first half of the movie was like when you play against the boss, and in the second half, it's like when you unlock him as a playable character. But overall, I like the movie. Let's see how the other variants of Kang are going to be. So if you're looking for a great post-episode discussion location, go to reddit.com/rmarvelstudios, and after every big show or movie, there's an episode discussion thread with a lot of great input from really awesome super mega fans. On a scale of 1 to 10 for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, I'm going to put it at an 8. It wasn't an Avengers Endgame or Infinity War. However, it was a solid superhero movie. Ant-Man and the Wasp's journey through the MCU continue in this movie as a great entrance into Phase 5 and giving us hints of the epic Marvel content that is to be released in Loki and the Kang Dynasty, future Avengers films. There's so much potential for so much action and so much story that groundwork needs to be laid in a movie like this. And I think the MCU always does a good job of laying groundwork. It's doing even more in the multiverse saga opposed to the Infinity Saga to set up its villains and its overarching story. Thanks for joining me today. It's been so much fun talking about Quantumania. There's so much, like I said, potential on where this can go, and there's going to be a lot more Marvel Maniac to come on the quantum realm, on the multiverse, on variants, and I can't even imagine where we're going to be a year from now maybe not that much farther down the line, or who knows, maybe some of the shows and movies in post-credit scenes to come, like Guardians of the Galaxy or Secret Invasion, they're going to maybe reveal a little bit more about this overall story. This has been Marvel Maniac and MCU After Show. I'm your host, Eric Cicada, aka Mr. Honest. If you want to follow us, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Marvel Maniac Pod. Assemble with us on Patreon, patreon.com/MarvelManiac. If you can, leave a review of the show. Any positive review goes a long way, and it may be featured on the show. Let me know your thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and all of Marvel in general. What are your thoughts on where we're going with all the Kangs and the Council of Kings? MarvelManiacPod@gmail.com. Wishing you the most amazing of weeks, and until next time, Avengers, disassemble.